The following is a real encounter that I had. In May of 2016, I decided to take a cruise ship vacation to Mexico with my girlfriend. I had just gotten back from a military deployment and was excited to begin the tropical vacation. The cruise ship would make 3 stops in Mexico, departing from California. The majority of the cruise was nice and relaxing, but the following event that took place has haunted me to this day and reminds me of the importance of situational awareness and intuition. On the 2nd stop in Mexico, I woke up early and got ready to explore the Mexican coast with my girlfriend. I grabbed some cruise ship breakfast, which was amazing, I'll add, and headed back to the room. She had told me that she wasn't feeling too well, probably from the late night before, and was going to get some more rest. I decided to debark the ship by myself and explore what I could. I debarked the ship with another group of tourists and arrive at the dock, where taxi cabs and shuttles are lined up and ready. I decided that I would stick with one of the large groups for safety reasons. I befriended one of them and they offered to keep me company, seeing as I was by myself. However, as we all approached a taxi shuttle, it was quickly filled up by the group and I was left by myself. The shuttle driver said it was full and to look for a cab, and they drove off. I was originally going to wait for another group to debark the cruise ship and tag along with them. But after 10 minutes, I grew impatient. A local taxi cab driver walked up to me and offered me a ride. With broken English, he said he could take me to a local restaurant for cheap. I bargained with him on the price and accepted his offer. This was my first mistake. As I followed him to his vehicle, he immediately got on a radio and started talking to someone in Spanish, and I assumed it was his taxi company. I got in his cab and he asked me what restaurant I wanted to go to. I told him to take me to his favorite local restaurant with the best food and beer. He mentioned it would be a little more money than we had discussed earlier, since it was further in town and away from the beach area. I agreed and we left. I noticed we were driving for quite some time, around 30 minutes, and I could no longer see the ship in the distance, and the local touristy atmosphere quickly changed. The local buildings were riddled with graffiti, and the whole area seemed impoverished. I wasn't bothered by this, as I had frequented Mexico quite often. We finally arrived, and the taxi cab driver told me he would be nearby and that the restaurant bartender would call him when I was done. The restaurant seemed pretty worn down. I'm sure I stuck out like a sore thumb too, but at this point I was hungry and in the mood for a cold beer. As I walked up to the bar, I asked for the menu. I immediately noticed the bartender didn't speak any English, based on the confused look on his face and his response in Spanish. Now, I'm not fluent in Spanish, but I know enough to get by. So I ordered some food with the best Spanish I could conjure up. Thank God for high school. He nodded his head and told me it would be $15 for the meal and $3 for each beer. 5 or 6 beers and an hour later, and I decided to head back to the ship. I noticed I was a little tipsy and probably drank a little too much. I told the bartender I was ready to leave, and he gave me a piece of receipt paper with $60 written on it. I told him that this was way more than what he said earlier, but he became immediately hostile with me and repeated himself over and over. I looked over to one of the other restaurant employees who just stared at me, offering no help to the situation. I knew I had no power in this situation and gave him the $60. I walked outside and waited for my cab, still pretty annoyed about the recent interaction. I told him to take me to the ship when he arrived. On the way back, I noticed he started taking some unusual side roads. On the way to the bar, he primarily took the main busy roads within view of the ocean and hills. But this time, we were surrounded by old, tall, worn-out buildings. I asked him where we were going and why we were taking a different route back. He said that there was traffic and this was a faster route. At this point, I didn't know what to do. It became clear we weren't heading back to the ship, looking at my phone's GPS. In fact, we were heading in the opposite direction now. He was driving on inclining roads, away from the coast, into the eastern regions of the town. My heart immediately started racing. I knew that the further we drove away from the ship, the harder it would be to get back. We stopped at an intersection, and I immediately jumped out, leaving behind a few $20 bills, more than what we had agreed on. He asked me where I was going, and I didn't reply. He parked his cab and started hastily walking towards me while getting on one of his radios. I quickened my pace and start to run, turning down random alleys and walking into a local cell phone store. I walked towards the back and walked into the bathroom, locking myself in. I was pretty sure I had lost him. I was probably in there for a good 15 minutes. I pull up my GPS on my phone and call the cruise ship company. I didn't exactly explain the predicament that I was in, just that I needed a cab, thinking I might have been overreacting a bit. A cruise ship-sponsored shuttle came by and picked me up. On the way back, I told the driver what had just happened. He looked at me, smirked, and said that I was a lucky man and that the cab driver didn't have good plans for me. He proceeded to tell me that they most likely thought I was drunk and were going to take me to a bad part of town where they would mug me or worse. He also said they were likely working for a local gang. Now, I'm not sure how true this is, but I know for a fact that I was being driven in the opposite direction of the ship. When I got back to the ship, I reported the incident to a crew member, and they shrugged it off and said they would look into it. I live in Ohio, and this particular event happened to me last December on the night before Christmas Eve. I was walking home from my buddy's house quite late. I cannot exactly recall the time, but if I'd have to throw a number out there, I would say around 2 a.m., so I guess technically it was Christmas Eve. The roads home were pretty barren, except for a few stray cars here and there. It was quite cold, but nothing I had not braved in the past. As I was trudging through the snow, I heard footsteps behind me. Not so much footsteps, but more the sound of a person running in my direction. I turned around to see what was responsible for the noise, and what I saw gave me chills, though what I saw really was not scary at all. There was a man maybe 10 yards away from jogging toward me. I turned back around and continued on my way home, going about things rather normally. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The footsteps were getting closer and closer, until they were directly behind me. "Hey man, let me borrow your phone," he said with a rather panicked tone as he grabbed my shoulder. "Excuse me?" I replied. "Just let me borrow your phone, man," he exclaimed again. I hastily explained to him that my phone was not in my possession, but rather at home in my apartment. Upon hearing that I was phoneless, the man bolted in the same direction I was headed. Though strange, I did not think much of it and continued home. Around 10 minutes later, I arrived back at my apartment, hung up my coat, changed clothes, and went to lie down in bed. After a couple of minutes of feeling wide awake, I sat up and turned the TV on. What I saw mortified me. There was a picture of the same husky man that had confronted me on my way home, with a blurb under the picture reading, "Armed man on the run after killing son, girlfriend." Needless to say, I was unable to fall asleep that night. I know that technically nothing happened to me, and this may not seem that scary. But trust me, the thought of knowing a killer literally made contact with you and spoke to you is quite unnerving. Luckily, I'm safe and I have not seen that guy again since the incident. I just wonder who he would have called, what would have happened to me had I actually lent him my phone. When I was 6 years old, my mom and I were driving home from a larger city about 4 hours away from ours. It's a long drive, and it starts out with windy, curvy roads. It can be more than a little nerve-wracking to drive. I remember I saw my mom getting tense and I felt scared because I knew she wasn't calm. Her eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror and back to the road. There was a car following us closely, way too close to a 75-mile-per-hour road. Whenever we would switch a lane, so would they. When we slowed down, so would they. Basically, anything my mom did, they copied. My mom was in full-on panic mode and didn't know what to do, so she went to pull over on an exit after about 20 minutes of the other car following us so recklessly. The car followed, of course. She pulled off on the side of the road and the car parked a little ways behind us. Another car was taking the exit, and the car that had been following us drove away quickly and merged back on the freeway. The car that had just exited pulled up, and a family was inside. They asked if we were okay. They'd seen the other car following us and knew something wasn't right. I hate to think what would have happened if that other car hadn't pulled off. Whoever that family was, I'm pretty sure they saved my mom and me.